One janitor, one arrogant music teacher, and a grand piano. What started as a smug attempt to publicly humiliate her in front of an elite crowd ended with an entire auditorium stunned into silence, and a lifetime of assumptions shattered in a single performance. You won't believe how she turned the tables with nothing but her calloused hands and a forgotten melody. It was a crisp spring evening at Roosevelt Academy, where chandeliers sparkled above linen-draped tables and the school's annual spring gala unfolded in polished elegance. Laughter flowed like wine, and the low hum of classical music drifted through the grand auditorium, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses and polite applause. At the center of it all stood Mr. Carlton Beach, the school's revered and reviled head of music, basking in praise and toasting to the sanctity of proper training. And tucked quietly in the corner, sweeping up crumbs no one else noticed, was Maria, the school's janitor, unseen and uninvited. But when Beach spotted her near the stage and dared her to entertain the crowd as a joke, he had no idea. He'd just handed the evening's spotlight to the one person who didn't ask for it and didn't need it to shine. What happened next left the room breathless, and no one, especially Mr. Beach, would ever forget it. Roosevelt Academy fell quiet after hours in a way that felt sacred. The gleaming corridors, once brimming with clacking heels and teenage chatter, settled into a hushed reverence. Lights dimmed to soft glows above locked classrooms, and from the auditorium, empty, dark, but never quite asleep, faint music would sometimes drift through the halls. A few students, staying late for theater rehearsals or last-minute project work, had heard it. A lone piano, barely audible, playing fragments of classical pieces. Debussy, Chopin, a bit of Satie. Some assumed it was a recording left on by a forgetful teacher. Others joked about a phantom pianist. None had ever seen who played. But it was Maria. She would wait until the final lights clicked off, until she was sure no one would need her mop or bucket. Only then would she enter the auditorium, softly close the heavy wooden door behind her, and approach the grand piano on stage. She never turned on the stage lights. The moon through the skylights gave her just enough to see the keys. She didn't need more. Her fingers remembered the geography of each note, like an old friend's face. When they touched the ivory, something dormant in her came alive. She didn't dare play long, just 10 minutes, sometimes less. But in those brief intervals, her calloused hands transformed. Every ache in her back, every hour spent invisible, evaporated into music. One Thursday evening, a math teacher named Miss Langley returned to grab a forgotten lesson plan. As she passed the auditorium, she paused. Faint notes fluttered under the door like whispered memories. She leaned in. Claire de Lune played not like a student performing a piece, nervous, mechanical, but like someone feeling it. She cracked the door slightly, expecting to find a hidden practice session, but the stage was dark, empty, except for a single silhouette at the piano. Maria, head bowed, posture humble but poised. Her expression was unreadable, lost in sound. Miss Langley stood, for a few seconds longer, frozen, then gently backed away without interrupting. She never mentioned it. But from that day on, she never referred to Maria as the janitor again. Maria's story wasn't one she ever volunteered. To those around her, she was the quiet woman who smiled while emptying trash bins, the woman who worked straight through her breaks to get home early and care for her aging father. But inside her, tucked away in quiet corners like forgotten sheet music, lived a much different past. Back in El Salvador, before the war reached their town, Maria had been a prodigy in a village with no stage. Her grandmother taught her on a broken keyboard donated by a missionary, a keyboard missing half an octave and stuck on full volume, but it was enough. At age 7, Maria could play back melodies by ear after hearing them once. By 10, she was composing lullabies for her little cousins, her dream to study at the Conservatorio Nacional. She applied, auditioned, and was told she had the hands of someone born for piano. But civil unrest broke out 2 months before classes began. Her father lost his job. Her younger brother disappeared during a raid. The family had to flee, first to Guatemala, then finally to the US. In the chaos, the music stopped. Not in her heart, but in her life. Maria built a new rhythm in America. Day jobs, late buses, second-hand shoes for her son. She married, divorced, worked 2 jobs at once. She learned to clean with speed and precision, to work without asking, to endure. Music became something she visited in dreams until Roosevelt Academy. She took the janitorial job for the hours, not the prestige. But when she saw the Steinway in the auditorium her first week, something in her shifted. A thread of her former self tugged loose from memory. She waited until the building slept and then began again. One afternoon during a student recital rehearsal, a girl named Ava forgot her backpack. She ducked back into the auditorium and froze. Maria was on the stage. Ava had seen Maria every day for years and never once imagined she could play. But here she was, eyes closed, playing Chopin's Nocturne like she'd been born under its spell. The playing was raw, emotional, not perfect but alive. Maria didn't notice her. Ava quietly stepped away. But later that night in her group chat she typed, "Guys, I think the janitor's a freaking genius." It became a quiet rumor. A whisper passed between curious students. No one confronted Maria. No one dared. But the mystique began to build. This idea that someone could be hiding something extraordinary behind a mop and silence. Maria remained unaware. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played because it was the only part of herself that the world hadn't managed to take. But change was coming, and it would arrive the night someone called her out, not to recognize her, but to mock her. A cruel dare, a spotlight she never asked for. The joke would be on them, because Maria didn't just know how to clean a stage, she knew how to own it. The spring gala was entering its final hour, and the air inside Roosevelt Academy's grand auditorium had grown thick with the hum of indulgence. Crystal glasses clinked with champagne, faculty mingled with trustees, students, dressed stiffly, in borrowed tuxedos and silk dresses, slinked backstage, relieved their performances were over. Mr. Carlton Beach was in rare form, perched near the front of the stage with a flute of sparkling rosé. He held court among donors and parents. His voice carried, effortlessly theatrical, every comment laced with wit, every anecdote polished to a gleam. He chuckled at his own punchlines, gestured broadly, soaked in the attention. But beneath the laughter, the room had begun to sag under. The weight of sameness, another student medley, another polite round of applause, another toast. Beach scanned the room, hungry for something fresh, something he could twist into a final flourish. That's when he saw her. Maria, tucked in the shadow of the side curtain, she was emptying the last of the trash bins into her cart. Her back was to the crowd, her shoulders hunched with habit. But Beach's eyes lit up with recognition and mischief. He leaned closer to the microphone. "Well now," he said with a smirk loud enough to draw eyes from every corner of the room. "Before we close the evening, I believe we still have one surprise left in our program." Maria didn't look up. Not at first. "I've heard whispers." Beach continued, pausing to let the tension build, "that our very own Maria, the heart and soul of Roosevelt's janitorial excellence, has a secret talent, a certain nocturnal fondness for the Steinway." Laughter bubbled through the crowd, some curious, some awkward. Maria froze. Her hand tightened around the trash bag she was tying. Slowly, she turned. Beach raised an eyebrow, delighted by her visible discomfort. "Maria," he said, gesturing grandly toward the piano, "would you do us the honor? After all, rumor has it you're quite the pianist after hours." The auditorium stirred. Some students exchanged glances. A few teachers shifted in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Maria blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The spotlight had turned, and she was standing in it, mop bucket, cleaning gloves, all. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. "No, Beach cut her off, chuckling into the mic. "Come now," he said. "No need to be shy. We're..." Among friends, let's see if street talent matches conservatory training. Another ripple of laughter. One of the board members chuckled uncomfortably. A student in the front row looked down at their shoes. Maria stood still. Her body felt leaden. 1,000 thoughts tangled in her mind, none of them coherent. Her instincts screamed, "Walk away!" She didn't belong on that stage. Not in front of these people, not like this. But then Beach twisted the knife. Or, he added, casually swirling his wine, perhaps those rumors were just fairy tales. The room quieted. His tone had shifted, lighter, in volume, but colder in intent. That line didn't just dismiss her, it diminished her, turned her into a punchline. Maria's eyes met his. Beach wore a smile meant to be charming, but behind it was a dare. He didn't want a performance. He wanted a spectacle, a harmless joke at her expense. He wanted her to try, to fail, and to confirm everything he believed about her kind of people, that they were meant to clean the stage, not stand on it. A sharp silence filled the space between them. From across the auditorium, Miss Langley sat, up straighter, her brow furrowed. She'd seen this before, in boardrooms, in classrooms, on playgrounds. A powerful man testing how far he could push someone who couldn't push back. Maria looked down at her shoes, at her cart, at the calluses on her hands. Her first instinct was to apologize, to excuse herself, to fade back into the quiet. But then, from somewhere deeper than fear, something surfaced. A voice, not loud, but rooted. Her grandmother's, maybe, or her own, long buried. They think they know what you are. Show them what they missed. Maria took a breath. She took off her gloves slowly and folded them with care. Then, without a word, she stepped away from her cart. Beach blinked, briefly thrown off. "Oh, well then, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, with a flourishing gesture, a debut performance from Roosevelt's most unexpected guest. As Maria approached the Steinway, the chatter hushed. Her shoes made soft thuds against the hardwood floor. The light above the piano illuminated her like a reluctant performer in a one-woman play. She didn't sit immediately. She paused beside the bench, looking at the black sheen of the lid, at the keys she had only touched in shadows. She could feel, eyes crawling across her back, some mocking, some curious, a few quietly willing her to walk away. Then she sat. A hush fell completely. Beach leaned back with a smug grin, confident the joke had landed. He expected fumbling fingers, maybe a few wrong notes, enough to get a polite laugh before segueing into his closing speech. What he didn't expect was what came next. The moment Maria sat down at the piano, the room shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no gasps or sudden realizations, just a subtle hush, like the collective breath of the auditorium had caught on the edge of a cliff. Even the clink of cutlery from the buffet line ceased. Wine glasses were held still in mid-air, waitstaff froze by instinct, and the laughter that had trickled just seconds earlier evaporated into a silence heavy with expectation and skepticism. Maria didn't meet their eyes. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Her hands were rough, worn by years of scrubbing tile and lifting heavy buckets, her fingernails short and clean. These were not the hands of a concert pianist, not in appearance, but when they touched the keys, they moved with a grace that seemed to rewrite the laws of form. The opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata spilled into the room like a sigh, slow, tender, each chord held in delicate restraint, reverberating through the auditorium with haunting intimacy. Maria didn't play for them. She played for the girl she once was. Knees tucked under a broken keyboard in a candle-lit kitchen in El Salvador, her grandmother humming beside her, correcting, her posture with soft taps on the shoulder. She played for the nights she'd spent working double shifts, then coming home to an empty apartment and silently tapping the table, wishing it were a piano. She played for the grief of a lost childhood, the ache of opportunity stolen by violence, and the decades of silence that followed. But most of all, she played for herself. Her eyes stayed closed, her brow relaxed. The keys reflected in her expression, light and shadow, memory and mourning. The music unfolded with no need to prove, only to reveal. This was not recital, it was confession. The audience sat stunned. A woman near the back blinked rapidly, wine untouched. A board member with arms crossed now leaned forward, his elbows pressed into his knees. The group of students whispering in the third row had stopped, whispering all together. One of them clutched their phone, but didn't record. They couldn't look away. And Mr. Carlton Beach, seated near the front with legs crossed and smugness intact, found his smile tightening. At first he maintained his composure, arms folded, chin tilted, but as Maria's playing deepened, his features faltered. She wasn't just capable, she was commanding. The melody rose, slow and mournful, and then, at the 3-minute mark, Maria did something unexpected. She didn't continue the sonata, she left it. Like slipping through a curtain, she transitioned mid-piece, seamless and bold, into something new. Something not written in any conservatory textbook. It was her own, a composition forged from memory and resilience, lush, melancholic, but pulsing with quiet defiance. The chords told a story that no words could, about fear, about love, about being unseen, and then about refusing to be. Her hands danced between minor keys and aching melodies. They trembled with vulnerability, but never lost their way. The sound swelled, not in volume, but in presence. It filled the space like light through a cracked window. The piece built into a quiet crescendo, not loud, not showy, but unignorable. It was the music of someone who had lived, and in that moment Maria became untouchable, not by title, not by income, not by status or pedigree, but by truth, her truth, poured into sound, woven through every note. She was no longer the janitor in the shadows. She was the center of gravity. When the final note rang out, the silence didn't break. It held, it lingered in the rafters, on the lips of every stunned listener, in the shiver down Beach's spine. Maria sat still. Her fingers rested gently on the keys. Her chest rose and fell once, twice. She didn't look up, she didn't need to, because she already knew. Then, as if released from a spell, the room erupted. The applause was not polite. It was thunderous, a wave of hands clapping, chairs scraping. Back, voices calling out words like bravo and unbelievable. Some stood, many did. The students who'd heard the rumors now cheered like believers. The teachers who had looked away earlier joined the ovation, their faces unreadable, some stunned, some embarrassed, all changed. Near the stage, Ms. Langley clapped slowly at first, then with growing pride, her eyes shining with unshed tears, even. The stoic headmaster stood, but Mr. Beach remained seated. His mouth was tight, his fingers drummed on his armrest, the rhythm awkward, unsure. The smirk he so often wore had collapsed. He clapped once, twice, but not out of respect, out of necessity. His eyes flicked from face to face, watching the mood of the room shift without his command. He had introduced Maria as a joke. Now he sat in the shadow of his own arrogance. The stage belonged to her. Maria stood slowly, not in triumph, not in arrogance, simply in stillness. She gave a quiet nod, a small, self-contained smile, more exhale than expression. Her eyes scanned the room, not for praise, but for something deeper, recognition, and she found it. Not in every face, but in enough. A teacher at the back mouthing thank you, a student holding her hand to her heart, a parent, tearful, whispering to their child, "Do you understand what we just witnessed?" Maria stepped down from the stage. She didn't rush, she didn't hide. Every step she took felt like a note trailing off into silence. She walked past Beach, who said nothing. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, then dropped to his wine. He had no words left, no authority to cling to, no clever retort. Maria had said everything that mattered, and she had done it without uttering a single word. The applause surged like a tide, and didn't stop for what felt like a lifetime. People clapped until their palms stung. Some stood with their mouths still open, stunned by what they had witnessed. Others, especially students, cheered with the uninhibited joy of seeing something rare and real. A few teachers, stern, buttoned up, always composed, now wiped the corners of their eyes. Maria stood motionless beside the piano, her arms hanging gently at her sides, her face unreadable. She wasn't crying, she wasn't smiling, she was simply whole. For the first time in decades, the thing she had guarded so carefully, so quietly, had been seen. Not as a novelty, not as a surprise, but as truth. She descended the stage slowly, as if returning to gravity. The spotlight had left her, but something had changed. The hush wasn't just reverence, it was recognition. Mr. Beach remained in his chair, clapping just enough to be seen, but his expression had soured. The control he had wrapped around the evening like a conductor's baton had been snatched away, without warning, without violence, and worst of all, without his consent. He muttered something under his breath, an empty excuse, a deflection, and slipped through the side curtain backstage. No one followed. His authority, so carefully cultivated through pedigree and posture, now seemed paper-thin. All it took was truth, wrapped in music, to unravel it. As the audience began to settle, an older woman stood from one of the reserved rows near the front. She was unassuming, silver, hair in a soft bun, a tailored navy dress, a simple pearl brooch at her collar. She walked with quiet purpose toward Maria, who was still near the steps of the stage, speaking softly to a student who had approached her in awe. The woman waited patiently until Maria turned. "Excuse me," she said, offering a warm smile. "I hope I'm not intruding." Maria shook her head gently, still unsure what to say. The woman extended her hand. "Dr. Elaine Park. I taught music theory and composition at Juilliard for 31 years. I'm retired now, but I still consult with youth conservatories and scholarship programs." Maria blinked. It's an honor to meet you." Dr. Park studied her, not her clothes, not her title, just her. "That wasn't just talent," she said softly. "That was soul. That was lived in. That was the kind of music people remember." Years later, Maria's throat tightened. "Do you have any recordings?" Dr. Park asked. Maria shook her head slowly. "No, I've never had the chance." "Well," the professor said, nodding thoughtfully, "it's time." "You did." She reached into her small purse and pulled out a card. "There's a youth studio I mentor just outside the city. It's small, but it's professional. I'll cover the cost. And if you're willing, I'd love for you to work with some of the students there. You have something to teach them that no curriculum can replicate." Maria stared at the card, her hand trembling as she took it. Studio time. Real equipment. A door she thought had closed forever, cracked open. She hadn't asked for it, she hadn't chased it, but by stepping forward in the moment she feared most, she had invited it. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't even know what to say." "You already said it," Dr. Park replied. "You said it through every note." The night wound down. Students filtered out, chattering with animated awe. Parents lingered longer than usual, stopping Maria to shake her hand, to say thank you, or "You reminded me why we do this." Ms. Langley found her near the stage door. "I knew you could play," she said, eyes warm. "I just didn't know how much we needed to hear you." Maria smiled, this one wide and unguarded. Even a few of the kitchen staff emerged from behind the curtain, clapping her on the back with playful cheers. "Maestra Maria!" one joked. She laughed, blushing, but for the first time, she didn't retreat. She stayed. She stood. Later, Maria walked through the now empty halls of Roosevelt Academy. Her mop bucket still waited for her in the shadows, untouched. Her gloves lay folded beside it. She picked them up, but didn't put them on. Not yet. She passed the music wing, where the grand piano still sat on stage, under a soft spill of light. It looked different now. Not grander, not more majestic, just less untouchable. It belonged to her as much as it did to anyone else. That night, Maria returned home to her modest apartment with something lighter in her step. Her hands, still slightly trembling, didn't feel tired for once. They felt ready. She placed the studio card on her small kitchen table and sat down in front of the faded keyboard she kept in the corner. its paint chipped, a few keys sticky. She touched the keys. The sound was imperfect, but it was hers, and it was enough. Maria never imagined that one humiliating moment would become her invitation. She hadn't played to prove anything, but by owning her gift, by refusing to shrink beneath ridicule, she had shown everyone, herself included, that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it plays a melody, and when it does, the world listens. For years, Maria had been a shadow in a place built for spotlight. She'd moved quietly between rows of brilliance, wiping floors beneath chandeliers, unseen by those who believed talent wore tuxedos and spoke in concertos. But now, something had changed, not just in the way others saw her, but in the way she saw herself. What happened at the gala was more than a moment. It was a reclaiming. Empowerment isn't granted by applause or titles. True brilliance doesn't ask for attention. It simply shines. And when it's finally seen, it doesn't roar with vengeance. It whispers, "I've always been here." Resilience lives in people like Maria, in those who've pressed dreams into silence because survival had to come first, in those who have waited not for permission, but for the courage to try again. And justice isn't always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's a janitor walking to center stage. Sometimes it's a single note breaking a room full of ego. And sometimes it's the silence that follows, a silence where the powerful realize they were never in control at all. Late that night, long after the gala had ended and the final lights were dimmed, Maria returned to the auditorium. The room was still. No audience, no spotlight, just the faint hum of the exit signs and the distant echo of her footsteps against polished floors. She crossed the stage slowly, not with hesitation, but with reverence. She wasn't the performer anymore. She was simply herself. Maria sat at the Steinway once more, the same bench where she had once been dared to fail. But now there was no fear. She opened the lid, her hands resting on the keys, not to impress, not to silence a room, but to feel, to remember who she was before the world asked her to be small. She began to play, not Beethoven, not Chopin. This time it was hers, a piece unnamed, a melody shaped by the years between hope and hardship. The music was imperfect, human, full of pauses and unexpected turns, but it was honest. It was real, and in that moment Maria was not a janitor. She was not an underdog. She was a musician. As the final notes echoed into the rafters, the camera pulls back, wider, farther, until Maria is small again on the vast stage. But this time, she's not swallowed by it. She fills it. The screen fades to black, the music lingering just a few moments more. Then quiet, not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of being heard.